Okay. I think we are ready to start. I know that time is precious. So first of all, welcome to everyone for another installment of webinars for busy lawyers. Money Matters, Financial Wellness for Lawyers. We're excited to have you join us for today's webinar presented by Rho Thomas, attorney and money coach. I'm Amy Levine, Director of Programs and Volunteers here at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, and I will be your host for today. Before I introduce our guest speaker, Rho, I would like to remind you about LCL. We offer one-on-one consultations with licensed clinicians on mental health, substance use disorders, and well-being. Additionally, we provide educational programming, support groups, and one-on-one consultations on law practice management for the Massachusetts legal community. And as a reminder, our services are confidential and free. Also, we love and encourage questions. Rho is going to be asking more interactive questions throughout the presentation, so please use the chat function for that. And for any additional questions at the end of the presentation, please use the Q&A function. And now I am honored to introduce our wonderful speaker, Rho Thomas. She is an attorney and money coach who believes that true wealth is having control of your time. She helps lawyers grow their net worth to create more freedom and choice in their lives. She also hosts the Personal Finance for Lawyers podcast, where she shares strategies each week for lawyers to improve their money mindset and manage their money to achieve true wealth. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rho.
Thank you so much, Amy. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. As Amy said, my name is Rho Thomas, and I am a lawyer turned money coach. I have a podcast where I share weekly money tips. I help lawyers day in and day out manage their money better and create freedom. And so I am here today to share some of the things that I've learned over the years with you. So let me ask you a question. How many of you would love to have no debt, money in the bank, and no stress about your finances? If that's you, type me in the chat. Let me know. Are you with me? All right, I'm seeing you guys. Yes, love it. Love it. So that is exactly what we're going to talk about today, right? The path to get there. Because money is the leading source of stress in America, and law is a stressful enough profession. So with this program, you will at least learn how you can alleviate one source of your stress. My goal is to show you how simple managing your money can be and to give you a plan to start managing your money better today. I want you to engage with me. So, as Amy said, I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to ask you to drop stuff in the chat. Because I was telling Amy before the webinar started, I heard this statistic maybe a year or two ago that said that people only remember like 10 to 20% of the things that they hear, but they remember something like 80 or 90% of the things that they engage with. I don't know how true it is, but if it can possibly help more of this info stick with you, then I'm going with it, right? So I want you to talk back to me in the chat because that is going to help the info that I'm sharing with you to click better and sink in more so you can get the most out of the presentation. So if you are willing to do that, give me a yes in the chat. Let's go. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I am going to share my screen so that I can get my presentation up. And I'm going to go off video so that our video boxes will not be in your way. All right, here we are. So, as I said, money is one of the leading causes of stress in America. Too many lawyers are feeling stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and all of that kind of stuff when it comes to money. And if you can relate to that, no worries, right? That's why I'm here today. We are going to get you the info that you need to master your money. So this program is called Money Matters. It's all about financial wellness for lawyers. And is it all right with you if I share a little bit about my story so that you can see how I got here? How did I go from being a lawyer to a financial coach? If that's okay, put share in the chat. Love it. Thank you. So this is where it all started, This is me back in 2016. This is literally the day I came home from the hospital after having my first child, the little one sleeping there on my chest. You can see I still have my hospital bracelet on, everything. So I was a third year associate at a firm here in Atlanta at the time. Shout out to any trademark and copyright lawyers on the call. That was my practice area. But a few months after this picture was taken, I was about to head back to work for maternity leave. And so my husband and I were sitting on this same couch. This is in our living room. And we were talking about me going back to work. I only had like a month or so left after my leave. And the firm offered a program where you could do a reduced FTE, which means you could do a percentage of the billable hour requirement for that same percentage of your salary. So I was thinking if I could come back at 75%, 80%, something like that, I would still largely be involved with the clients and the work I was doing, but it would take a little bit of the edge off with the hour. So I'd have more time to spend with our baby. So we get our computers out, we're pulling up our finances, how much we're making, how much we're paying out, like all of that to see if we could make something like that work. And what we found was that we could not afford the pay cut. Let me ask you, who here has student loans? Put me in the chat. Yep, I'm seeing some student loan people too. Yes. When we added up everything with our finances, we had over $678,000 of debt. Almost half a million of that was student loans. And we had a negative $342,000 net worth. When I tell you it felt like a gut punch, like, have you ever felt like you were doing the right things? You thought that you were heading in the right direction. You were doing the things that you thought you were supposed to do, but it turned out like, oops, nope, you're not. Right? That's what this was for me. So up to that point, we had been doing the things that we were, quote, supposed to do. Like we paid all of our bills on time. We paid our credit card off each month in full. We were saving for retirement some, but we weren't being intentional with our money. So we weren't really making progress with our money. We were pretty much staying in the same place because everything that wasn't going to bills or to retirement was pretty much just getting spent. And I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but it feels like, or it felt like we were making this really good money, but it seemed like we couldn't make any headway, right? Like you can't pay off your debt. You can't seem to build your savings, right? You don't know where your money's going each month. You can't seem to make that progress. I didn't know that becoming a lawyer wouldn't keep me from being broke because that's what society told us our whole lives, right? Go to school, get a good job, everything will be all right. And, plus we're lawyers. So we're supposed to be the ones who made it. Like I wasn't supposed to be in all this debt and not able to do the things I wanted to do for my family. I see someone says, Amen. Yes, like I wasn't supposed to be in this position. Right. And so I became obsessed with learning about personal finance and figuring out the parts that society didn't tell us. So I was listening to podcasts and reading blogs, and I came across all these stories of regular people who were getting out of debt and saving all this money and doing all this amazing stuff. The crazy part was none of them were lawyers. Most of them made less than we were making. And the one story I always share because it just made such an impression on me was it was a couple and they were teachers and they wanted for one of them to be able to stay home once they started having kids. So they paid their house off on teachers' salaries. And I'm looking like, I'm a lawyer, right? My husband is actually a physician. He was a resident at that time, but he's a physician, which is a big part of why we had half a million in debt. But I'm a lawyer, he's a doctor, and I'm seeing these people who are doing better than us on teacher salaries. And that's when I realized, write this down, right? Major key here. It's not about your job. It's not about how much you make. It's all about what you do with your money. It's not about your job or how much you make. Tell me, what's it about? Who was listening? Or who can read, I guess, because it's on the slide. It's about what you what? Yes. What you do with your money. Exactly. Exactly. So we needed to do something different. So I started studying the things that these people were doing, the people in the blogs and the podcast and all of that, right? Because clearly what they were doing was working and what we were doing wasn't. And so I looked at the common threads in their stories, and I tried the techniques that they were using, and I tweaked the things to fit us in our lifestyle. And I developed this system of managing our money that has worked for us for years now, one that allows us to live our lives but still make progress with our finances. So, in that first year of using our new system, we paid off almost $50,000 of debt. And I felt so motivated and such a sense of accomplishment because we were actually seeing some change. Like we could actually see the numbers moving. Ultimately, we paid off all of our student loans plus a few other debts. It was a total of over $500,000. And now, instead of the negative $342,000 net worth I told you about, we've turned things around and built a net worth of over $1 million. Somebody type million in the chat. Like, I can't even begin to describe the lightness that I feel now, like how much weight that took off. And along the way, I started to help other lawyers to implement the system that we use to manage our money. So to date, my clients have collectively paid off over $450,000 of debt and saved over $150,000. And that's just what they did in the time that we worked together. So those numbers, if I could continue to work with them or if I could continue to follow them, are probably much higher. Someone asked in what time period. So I typically work with my clients in about 6 month increments. I think there were a couple who might have stayed on, but on average, I work with my clients in 6 month increments. So that's a collective number too. I want to make sure that that's clear. So, but those numbers are much higher if I could continue tracking their finances. I'm only tracking what they do during that time frame that we work together. And I share all of that with you, not to impress you, but to impress upon you the power of learning how to manage your money better. Like it is so important, and I want you to take it to heart. So, with that, we are going to dive into the main areas I see lawyers struggling with their money. These are things I struggled with. These are things I see my clients struggling with, maybe things that you're struggling with. But we're going to go through 4 areas, and they are managing cash flow, paying off debt, saving and investing, and money mindset. And then I'm going to teach you the process I use to manage my money and that I teach my clients. And then we will have time for questions at the end. So if you're ready, type let's go in the chat and let's get started. Let's go. Yes. All right. So the first area that we are going to talk about is managing your cash flow. Many lawyers have a general lack of awareness around their money, their spending, all of that. So this looks like not knowing where your money is going each month, maybe overdrafting your account, maybe your credit card bill is consistently higher than your paycheck. Maybe you just feel like you should have more money, right? If you have ever experienced any of these things, it's very common. But the thing is, this part is the foundation of everything else you want to do with your money. Because when you don't have a handle on your cash flow and you don't know what's happening with your money each month, it has a trickle down effect on all the other areas. So a lot of lawyers make good money, but still feel broke. I just told you my story, right? Like we were able to cover our bills. We saved some for retirement. We bought cool things. We took some trips. Like we went to London, we went to Paris, made good memories, all that. But we weren't paying attention to our money. There was no intention behind the way we were managing it, which is why we didn't have much to show for the money we had made. Like we didn't have much in savings. We definitely hadn't made progress on our student loans, and we were making 6 figures, like more than a lot of people could even dream of. I was at like 140 or 150, and my husband was at around 40 or 50 at the time. And yet we were broke, right? Does anyone else feel like these salaries seem like a whole lot more until you're actually making the money and paying the bills and all that? Like a big part of that is that it's really easy for your expenses to grow to fill your income when you're not being intentional. So let me show you this graphic. This is one of the things that I came across in all that research that I told you about back in the day. So often we will get raises or bonuses or some other increase in income. And rather than making a plan for how to use that money, it just kind of slips through our fingers. We just end up spending it. And then over time, things that we once considered wants now become needs. These things that were once luxuries, we now consider necessities. And a lot of times we'll justify it with statements like, oh, I work hard, I deserve it, right? How many of us have ever said some version of that before? Like, no shame if you have. I know I definitely have, right? But with all these new necessities, all these needs, your base spending gets higher as your income goes up. And as you can see, like your savings just kind of levels out, right? So this concept is called lifestyle creep. It's where you're spending more as you make more, so you don't ever really get to reap the benefits of having the higher income. So it's called lifestyle creep, all right? All of us do this on some level. Like, I'm not living the same way I was living when I was in college or law school. I doubt you are either, and I'm not suggesting that anyone should. However, if we don't keep lifestyle creep in check, that's how people make more money year after year, but don't make any progress financially and think if they just made a little bit more, then they'd be okay. But here's the thing, wealth is built in the gap between your income and expenses. Somebody put gap in the chat. Make sure you're still with me. All right, you're there. All right, so what do I mean by that? Let me show you this. So in these graphs, the green represents income, the red represents expenses. So in the first one, you see that the expenses are far higher than the income. There is no gap, right? This person is going into debt to cover the additional expenses beyond their income. In the second one, the expenses are exactly the same as the income. So let's say I make 5,000, I spend exactly 5,000. Again, there is no gap. There's no margin for error. There's no room for unexpected expenses, any of that kind of stuff. If anything goes off plan, I'm going to go right into debt, right? This is paycheck to paycheck. In the final one, you can see that the expenses are lower than the income. There's a gap there. That gap is where your wealth is built. That is money that's not being spent. That income level that's above the expenses is the money that we use to build our savings, pay off debt, and invest. So if you're not paying attention to your cash flow, it's really easy to be in one of those first two situations where you're going into debt or living paycheck to paycheck. But we want to be in that last one where we're able to build wealth. All right, so with that, I've got a quick quiz question for you. So what percentage of Americans do you think are living paycheck to paycheck? A, 34%, B, 53%, or C, 78%? Oh, I'm seeing C's. All right, I see a B, C. Yep, you guys are on it. It's C, 78%. Anywhere from 60 to 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck based on various surveys. And that number includes 60% of millennials making $100,000 or more, 25% of households making $150,000 or more, and 36% of people making $250,000 or more. So again, it shows you that it's not about how much you make, it's about what you do with the money. I also want to highlight that paycheck to paycheck in the legal profession may not look the way that you typically think, right? So lawyers and other people at these income levels are probably not getting to the point where, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to eat, or I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pay my bills. What typically happens for us is it's having to wait to pay a bill until you get paid again, or you have high credit card balances that you can't pay off, or you don't have money available to achieve your goals. So the thing I want you to remember is that it's impossible to build wealth living paycheck to paycheck. Like we just talked about how wealth is built in the gap between your income and expenses. So you cannot build wealth if there's no gap there. All right, so now let's talk about debt. Because as lawyers, we tend to have a lot of student loan debt, but we might also have credit card debt or car loans or personal loans, things like that too. So that brings me to our next quiz question. What percentage of law students do you think graduate with more than $100,000 of student loan debt? Is it A, 55%, B, 75%, or C, 95%? I'm seeing some C's. Yep. So the answer is actually B, it's 75%. So the majority of law students take out student loans. So on my C's, it is about 95% of students who take out student loans. About 75% graduate with more than 100K though. And lawyers also report delaying milestones like getting married, having kids, buying houses because of their student loans. But then beyond student loans, the next most common type of debt I see is credit cards. So what do you think is the average credit card balance per person in America? A, 2,200, B, 4,300, C, 6,500. I'm seeing a mixture. The answer is C, 6,500. So the average is $6,500 per person with a total credit card balance in America of 841 billion. Anecdotally, though, the balances that I typically see are more like 10 to 20,000 per person. There aren't lawyer specific credit card statistics, but that's just what I've seen in my own experience. And then also for personal loans, the average balance is around that $6,500 range. The average car payment is around 500 to 650 a month. So we are dealing with a lot of debt. And the bigger issue than the amount of debt we have is how we tend to approach it. There is no plan, right? My husband and I were just making the minimum payment the bank told us to pay. We didn't know that there was any other way, right? We had no idea what was going on with our debt. We didn't know any of the details, like how interest rates impacted and all of that. It was just like, oh, the bank says to pay this, and we made the payment. Many lawyers will ignore and avoid their debt altogether. Like, if I just don't look at it, maybe it'll go away, right? And then another thing I see is people moving their debt around. So, you know how you'll get those offers that are like, you can refinance for X percent, or you can do this balance transfer for Y percent. A lot of lawyers get caught up with stuff like that because they will take out a personal loan or do a balance transfer to pay off their credit card or whatever. So they feel like they've made some progress. But then again, because there's no plan, then they end up running that balance back up again. And so now you've got the balance that you moved plus the new balance that you've run back up. So we got to have a strategy for how to actually pay off the debt. And we're going to get to that at a later point. But first, we are going to talk about saving and investing. So these are areas that we often know we should get around to, but don't put a plan in place for, right? So it just keeps getting put off to later. But of course, later doesn't make it any easier. And because of this tendency to keep putting things off, many lawyers don't have much saved or don't have as much as they'd like. So that brings me to the next question. What percentage of Americans do you think have less than $1,000 in their savings account? Seeing some C's, some B's. Yep. All right. The answer is C. 69% of Americans have less than $1,000 in their savings account, and almost half, 45%, have $0 in savings. Beyond saving, we also need to be investing, but it's another one of those things that keeps getting put off till later. We often talk about saving for retirement, but technically that is investing. So, what percentage of Americans do you think have nothing saved or invested for retirement? I'm seeing C's there. So, this one is actually A. 25% of Americans have nothing invested for retirement. But the concerning thing here is that number includes about 15% of both Gen X and baby boomers. So the segment of the population that's closest to retirement or at retirement age. So, what is the issue? Why do so many people struggle with these things? Many lawyers think the issue is that they just need to make more money. Like, if I can just make a little bit more, everything will be okay. But candidly, for the people I work with, likely for the people on this call, that is not it, right? For some of you, there may have even been a time where you thought you'd be set if you could just make the income that you make now. And now it feels like you need to make more, right? Think back to that infographic I showed you with the needs that have become, or the wants that have become needs, right? Are there times where people actually don't make enough to cover their bills? Yes. But for the majority of lawyers, that's not the case. All of the issues that we just talked about come down to overspending. Somebody put overspending in the chat. Are you guys with me? Okay, just making sure. I'm seeing some overspending. So overspending is spending as much as or more than you earn, right? And so the key is to learn how to manage the money that you make now. You've got to figure out why you're overspending. And that stems from your money mindset, which is what we're going to talk about next. So our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are all connected, and they lead to everything that's happening with our money and all the other areas of our lives. So if you're familiar with cognitive behavioral theory and psychology, it teaches that there are things that exist or happen out in the world, like money, like other people, like situations that come up, that person that cut you off in traffic, right? Whatever it is. And then we bring our thoughts or our opinions to those things. And that is what actually creates our experience of those things. So our thoughts lead to particular emotions. Those emotions lead us to do or not do certain things, and that leads us to certain outcomes. And then our brain uses those outcomes as evidence to prove that original thought and dismisses evidence to the contrary or that's not relevant to the original thought. So, my favorite example here of how the brain focuses in on relevant info. How many of you have ever bought a new car or thought about buying a new car? Type me in the chat. I'm seeing yes, yep, not me. Yes. And then all of a sudden, everybody on the road had your car. Did you see that? You buying a new car, and then all of a sudden, everybody's got that same thing. It's not actually that all of a sudden everybody has the car, right? But your brain notices the car more because it's relevant information to you now. So the connection between your thoughts and behaviors and actions and all of that is the key to the changes that you want to make with your finances. So let's talk about your thoughts about yourself. Because lawyers generally tend to be very hard on ourselves. And we think we have to do everything exactly perfectly right or we failed, right? When my clients first come to me, they have lots of thoughts about themselves and their ability to handle money that are often very negative. So things like, I'm not good with money. I don't know how to do this. I'll never figure this out. I should know how to do this by now, right? Can anyone relate to beating themselves up like this? You don't have to put it in the chat, but I know I can, right? I'm probably the harshest to myself, but beating ourselves up doesn't exactly motivate us to want to work on our finances. You're never going to get to positive results from negative thinking, or at least not long-term sustained positive results, right? But then on the money front, we tend to think things like money is complicated, being good with money means you have to be deprived, budgeting is time consuming, I don't want to do this, right? There's no point in trying, this is not going to work. And if you believe these kinds of things about money and the skills that it takes to manage your money, how likely are you going to be to take the steps to manage the money better? Even if you really want to, you're not going to do it, right? Or you may start, but then you don't stick with it because there's no shortage of information out there about personal finance. But the reason that we don't implement is always because of our mindset, the way that we're thinking about it. I can give you all the strategy in the world. I'm going to give it to you in the next step. But if you don't have the right mindset, if you are still thinking negatively about yourself, about money, about the skills to manage money, then you're probably not going to implement. So, a lot of having the right mindset comes down to being able to tell the difference between facts and opinions. So, the facts of things that exist in the world versus your thoughts about them, your opinions. So, I got another exercise for you. This statement, it's hot outside, fact or opinion? You can put it in the chat. I'm seeing fact, opinion. Yep. This is an opinion, right? Some people may think it's hot, but some people may not. So it just depends on your experience or if you tend to be more hot natured or cold natured or where you are used to being, right? Where you maybe live or grew up and what the climate is like there. How about this one? Roe had a lot of debt. Fact or opinion? I'm seeing fact, 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 opinion. Yep. This is actually an opinion as well. Some people may think I had a lot, but someone, might not. Like, what if someone has $2 million of debt? Do they think that my 678,000 was a lot then? Maybe, maybe not. Another example that I often give here around money is the typical student loan debt I see, which is around 200,000. So a lot of my clients feel like it's this overwhelming number and they're so distraught about it and it's terrible and all of that. But when we got to 200,000, we were celebrating because we were more than halfway done. It was a huge milestone. So the fact is the same, the $200,000 of debt, but the opinions or thoughts about it is different. And that's what creates the different experiences of it, being distraught versus celebrating. All right, here's one more. It's 7 p.m. Friday, it's 95 degrees. Fact or opinion? Fact. Seeing fact. Yes, you guys got it. Oh, I put opinion, but this is a fact. Because I can look at the clock, the calendar, the thermometer, and verify these things, right? So being able to distinguish between facts and opinions is important because a lot of us believe everything we think, right? We take our thoughts as facts and they are not, they are opinions. There are often many different thoughts or opinions available to us for the same set of facts. And the ones we choose color how we experience our finances and all the other lives or the other areas of our lives. So give me a yes in the chat if you're following me. This fact versus opinion thing. All right. Love it. I see you guys. All right, so I want to go through a quick example of this relationship between our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors and how it can play out in your finances. So I'm going to use I'm not good with money as my example because that one comes up pretty often. And there is a tool out of the life coach school called the self-coaching model, and it is a really effective way of looking at this relationship. So the tool uses the letters CTFAR to stand for the different pieces of the loop. C stands for circumstance. So we talked about how there are things that exist out in the world and we have thoughts about them, right? Such as money. So those are circumstances. They're not good, they're not bad, they're not whatever labels we put on them, they just are. T stands for the thought that we have about that circumstance. That could also be your opinion about that circumstance. F stands for feeling or emotion. So what you feel when you think that thought. A stands for action. So these are the behaviors, the things that you're doing or not doing. And then R stands for result, or another word for outcome. So getting into this example, the circumstance is money. If I think I'm not good with money, I might feel defeated, right? And then what am I going to do for there? I might avoid looking at my bank account. Maybe I don't plan my spending. I run up my credit card because I'm not paying attention to how much I've been spending. I don't look at my debt balances. I overspend. And the result is that I end up not being good with money. And I put good in quotation marks because that's still an opinion, right? That's still a thought. But maybe the underlying results there are I don't have money left to save. I overdraft my account. I don't have money to pay down my debt. Maybe I go into more debt. And then seeing all those things, I think, see, I'm just not good with money. And that loop starts all over again. So you can see how important it is to address your money mindset when you're thinking about improving your finances. Because as I said before, I can give you all the strategy in the world, but if you don't address your mindset, it won't do you any good. Are you tracking? Type tracking in the chat. All right, perfect. You're with me. So we have talked about all the issues. Let's talk about how to fix them. We are going to talk about the process that I use and teach my clients, and it is very simple. So the first step is you're going to increase the gap between your income and expenses. Then you're going to use the difference to save, pay off debt, and invest. And then along the way, you're going to manage your mindset and redirect yourself from those negative thoughts that we just talked about. So let's dive into each of those steps. The first piece is to create a spending plan or budget. That is how you increase the gap between your income and expenses. Not having a plan really hinders your ability to achieve your goals and build wealth because, as we talked about, it's so easy for your expenses to creep up to the point that they equal or exceed your income when you're not being intentional. So, when you don't know what's coming in, you don't know what's going out, you're not being intentional with how you direct it, it's going to be very hard to make the progress that you could be making with your money. Have you ever looked in your account to see if there's money in there and that's how you made a decision about whether you're going to buy something? Give me a yes or no in the chat. I think I'm the only one who can see this. Yeah, yes. That was me too, right? I know I'm not the only one doing that. But we are not doing that anymore, right? So you want to decide what you're doing with your money ahead of time. Somebody put ahead of time in the chat. Because when you are creating your plan, you're going to make sure that you account for your needs, your wants, and your goals. So I don't believe in cutting everything but essentials and stop drinking lattes and stop eating avocado toast and stare at the wall and whatever until you pay off all your debt. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that's sustainable. Instead, you're going to consider what you value and what's important to you. So if lattes are important to you, if fancy restaurants are important to you, if designer shoes are important to you, put that stuff in your plan, but you have to balance it. So the money that you spend on those things is money that you won't have available for something else. So if those things are important to you, how do you account for them in your plan? It might be that you're not doing those things every single week or every single month, even, but you're able to do them on some sort of periodic basis, right? You figure out, though, how can I put this in my plan? How can I make space for these things that are important to me and still be able to achieve the goals that I want? All right. So those are the kinds of questions that you want to be asking yourself. If you're following, type following in the chat. All right. Perfect. I also want to talk for a moment to anyone on the call who, like me, is the first in your family to be a lawyer. So you may feel pressure to help members of your family or others who aren't in a similar position, whether that's external or internal pressure, because sometimes we put that pressure on ourselves, right? Hear me on this though. You have to take care of your own finances before you can help anyone else. Because if I'm going beyond my means, trying to help other people, now we're all sitting here looking at each other struggling. Okay? If you know I'm telling the truth, type true in the chat because you've got to put yourself, yes, you got to put yourself on a stronger financial footing before you can help anyone else. And that doesn't mean that you have to be completely out of debt and have all this money in the bank and all of that, but you need to, at minimum, know what's going on with your finances and be planning how you're using it instead of flying by the seat of your pants, right? You need to have a plan to reach your goals. And when you're able to achieve your goals, you're in an even better position to help your loved ones. So, going back to my own story, we are much better able to help others now, having no debt but our mortgage and a positive net worth, versus when we were drowning in debt with a negative net worth. Like at one point, the minimum payment on our student loan debt alone was $3,500 a month. So now that's $3,500 that can go toward helping others if they need it. If this is making sense, give me a yes in the chat. All right, perfect. To be clear, you can still help along the way. I just want you to be intentional about it, right? While we were getting out of debt, we did still help loved ones where we could. We continued to tithe. We continued to give to other organizations that we care about, but we did it in a way that we made sure that we were still able to hit our goals and we weren't putting ourselves in financial jeopardy trying to help. Because even if you have a certain amount of money, it doesn't necessarily mean you have it to give. If you've got credit card debt and you've got 6 figures of student loans, all of that is pulling at your income too. And if you don't have savings and you're giving your last dollar trying to be helpful, who's going to help you? So we need to make sure that you're still taking steps to clean up that debt and build your savings, even as you're being generous. And the way you do that is by accounting for it in your spending plan. So if that's something that's important to you, make room for it in your plan. But don't neglect your own goals because at the end of the day, you can't truly help anyone else if you're struggling. Somebody type got it if you're hearing me. Like I know we have big hearts. That's why a lot of us got into the legal profession, but you got to make sure that you're helping yourself first. Otherwise, no one is getting helped. It's like when you're on the plane and they tell you put your own mask on before you put someone else's on. Same thing with your finances. All right. So now we talked about creating a gap between your income and expenses. Let's talk about what to do with it, starting with debt, because this tends to be one of the biggest goals for my clients. The key here is to make a plan for it. It's not to say that you got to pay all your debt off immediately. Some people will pay off high interest rate debt and they will just kind of let the low interest debt ride and move on to other goals. Some people choose to knock it all out regardless of their interest rate. Ultimately, it's a matter of personal preference, but the thing I want you to keep in mind is that the power of compound interest works against you on your debt balances, especially when you have high interest debt. So maintaining those balances is going to cost you more over time. But let's talk about plans. So the two most popular methods for paying off debt are the debt snowball and the debt avalanche. The debt snowball is where you pay your debts from smallest to largest balance without regards to the interest rate. The avalanche is where you pay them from largest to smallest interest rate without regard to the balance. Some people will also look at whether there are particular debts that are more bothersome to them and pay those off first. So, for example, one of my clients' mom co signed on one of her loans and she hated having that debt hanging over her mom's head. So, she focused on that one first, even though it wasn't the smallest balance, it didn't have the largest interest rate, right? It bothered her, so she wanted to take care of that one. In making your plan, you can also look into repayment plans for your student loans. You can look into refinancing. Things like the personal loans or the balance transfers, when you've got a plan, are a great tool. All right. The main thing with paying off debt, though, is you're going to focus on one at a time. Somebody type one in the chat. We are not splitting the extra payment across 5 different debts and paying extra on this one this month and then extra on that one next month. Focus on one at a time until it's paid off and then move to the next one. All right. So let's talk about savings. The first step here is if you don't have an emergency fund, you want to look at building one. And the amount depends on your personal situation and risk tolerance. Some people do a month of expenses, some people do a year. Standard advice is 3 to 6 months of expenses, but it's really up to you. The main thing is to have a cushion if things go sideways and you don't have your income coming in. You also want to make sure that this is in a boring, unsexy place. I've heard of people putting their emergency fund in the stock market to try to get a better return. You don't want to do that. The reason that you can get a better return in the stock market is because it's riskier. So you don't want to go like need your emergency fund and then half of it's gone, right? You want it to be in a boring savings account where you don't have to worry about the balance fluctuating. And then beyond the emergency fund, you might have other goals like saving for a house or a vacation or saving for the holidays. You want to make sure that you make room for those things in your spending plan too, so you actually make progress toward those goals. In the long run, you don't only want to put your money in a savings account, you want to invest your money because your money can work harder for you than you ever can. All right. So with debt, the power of compound interest works against you. With investing, the power of compound interest works for you. I'm not licensed to give investment advice, but I can give you some general information. So most people are familiar with investing in the stock market. Most people have access to the stock market through their 401k or other retirement accounts. There are also other non-retirement accounts you can use to invest in the stock market. And then, of course, there are investments beyond the stock market like real estate and bonds and crypto and all of that. The main thing is you want to understand what you're investing in. When you don't understand your investments, that's a surefire way to lose your money. Are you still with me? Type with you in the chat. All right, you're still there. All right, I want to touch a little bit on financial advisors. If you don't want to worry about investing yourself, you can hire a financial advisor. If you do decide to work for or work with an advisor, excuse me, one of the things I encourage you to consider is how they're compensated. Some advisors make commissions off of selling you investments, which means they inherently have a conflict of interest because they could make more if they put you into an investment that offers a higher commission, even if it's not necessarily the best fit for you. That's not to say that they will, but they could. So you want to look for an advisor who is a fiduciary, meaning they have to act in your best interest. Also look for a fee-only advisor, which means they charge you a set fee and their compensation is not tied to you buying any particular investments. Watch out for fee-based advisors because these still offer some commission-based products. Again, none of this is to say that any particular kind of advisor is definitely going to take advantage of you or anything like that. I'm sure there are great, honest advisors in all different fee structures and different settings, and they can be a great asset to you on your financial journey. You just want to know some of the things that you want to consider. And then the ongoing piece of this process is managing your mindset. So you want to notice those thoughts that come up for you around money and question them. Are they really true? What else could be true, right? Notice how you're speaking to yourself. And if it's hard for you to not be so harsh with yourself, one of the things that I do is to think about how I would talk to a friend or partner, like my husband or my child, if they were telling me about a mistake that they made. Like I find sometimes it's easier to access compassion for other people, right? But just be mindful of the way that you're talking to yourself. Like you're used to being really hard on yourself. Many of us are, but we don't have to beat ourselves down to see the results we want. Okay. And then as you do this process, you can expect to feel more in control as you start choosing how you want to use your money rather than just waiting and seeing what happens on the back end. You're going to know exactly where your money's going and stop feeling stressed or overwhelmed or even thinking about money so much. You feel at peace with your money. You will have more money available for your goals without feeling deprived. And ultimately, as you do this work, you'll create more freedom and flexibility in your life as you control your spending and direct your money intentionally. You're going to have more options available to yourself, and that is an amazing place to be. So I've got a little gift for you. I created a free guide that will teach you how to correct 5 common mistakes that I see that keep lawyers from getting themselves out of debt. If you go to rhothomas.com/LCLMA, you can grab a copy. And then if you want to connect with me, if you want help implementing this process or just stay in touch, you can send me an email to hello@rhothomas.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. I am Rho Thomas there. All right, so I'm gonna close this, stop sharing my screen, and come back on camera, and we can take some questions. And I know some of you were putting some questions in the Q&A.
Ro, if I could just mention one, this was excellent. And there were a few takeaways I just want to re-emphasize because again, I think it's helpful. One is changing your mindset, and you'll feel better when you feel like you have more control over it. So that was one piece. I also just want to mention that we do have some webinars on self-compassion, and so ways to change that inner voice, which I think makes a big difference again when you're doing all this. And then the other piece of information was paying off the debt one at a time. So that was interesting because I think our inclination might be, oh, I have to pay all of these things at once. And then I think it becomes overwhelming, but also probably makes more sense financially, and the planning. So rather than just, again, being very mindful and thoughtful about where your money is going provides, again, more control over it. So just wanted to mention those couple of things, and I do see we have some questions. So person says, great presentation. Can you suggest any apps, paid or free, to help manage a spending plan?
So I will tell you, I am old school and I use a spreadsheet. I love using a spreadsheet for managing my finances, but an app that I know some of my clients love is called You Need a Budget. And I think it's like YNAB for short. So that one could be helpful as well.
The other thing I just wanted to note, my husband is very financially aware. And one of the things, because again, you talked about not necessarily giving up what you love, and that's also important so you don't feel deprived. So one of the things that I love to do is binge watch TV shows. And so one of the things that I do now, rather than subscribing to Netflix and Hulu and Apple and all of them, because you can pay per month, I choose one for the month. I binge all those shows that I can, and then I see something, oh, this looks great on Apple. I cancel my Netflix and I watch Apple for the month. So anyway, that was just one thing. And I think one can save close to $1,000 a year if you look at it from a yearly perspective, and that's real money.
Yeah, those subscriptions can definitely add up. And I think that's a really great way of implementing exactly what I was saying of like, okay, what's important to me right now, right? This month, maybe there's a specific show on Netflix that I want to watch. And so I'm going to go ahead and do the Netflix subscription. I'm not going to worry about the Hulu one. And I think also, Amy, that's a great example of questioning the way that things are typically done. Because I think sometimes we get into these ruts of like, oh yeah, you just have the Apple subscription and the Netflix subscription and the Hulu subscription and all of that. Most people aren't doing it the way that you are. And so you just kind of question that, like, why do I have to have all of these? I'm going to choose the one that I want in this moment and I'm going to cancel the others. Love that.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll pass it along to my husband. Somebody made a comment, important for both individuals in a marriage to participate in money matters.
Yes, I 100% agree with that. But I will say that sometimes there is one spouse or partner who is more inclined, if you will, with the money, like who actually enjoys the stuff. And often there's one who doesn't. I think that both should be involved in terms of making decisions. And another thing, I'm going to give you guys a free tip. If you are in a partnership or a marriage or something where you share your finances, one of the best things that my husband and I did was we opened fun money accounts that we call them. So we've got our joint account, and that's where we pay for the bills, the groceries, stuff for the kids, etc. But then we each get a set amount of money each month that just goes from that joint account into our fun accounts, and we can spend that however we want to. And that stemmed from one of the biggest issues in our marriage when we first got together, and not got together, but got married and like put our finances together, was spending on things that the other person didn't value. So it was like, for me, it was makeup. He was spending a lot on coffee. Like, he was always at Starbucks, and I'm buying like the MAC lipsticks and things like that. And so because of that clash, that's where we got the idea of like, well, what if you just had this amount of money? It comes out, goes into your set fund money account. And when you spend on it, it doesn't even impact the other person or the family. So that is a tip that I will give to anyone who is sharing finances with a partner.
Mm, excellent. Great tip. I'm just looking, somebody who had mentioned again, the marriage, death or divorce might change things. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
And then I see someone in the Q&A asked about putting something in the chat. If you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, that's fine. If you want to put it in the Q&A, that's fine too. We're able to see both.
One of the things I'll just mention, this is not an app, but Ally, and I promise I'm not getting paid by Ally, but they have what I like about how they do things. So it's a low interest, just money savings. It's not risk. It's all your money, but you can put it in different buckets. So I think what you talked about is you had a bucket essentially for your fund money, Ro, and you have different buckets so you know exactly what you can spend. And it's almost like an Excel spreadsheet, different, but again, knowing what money you have to spend where. So again, if anybody's interested, do you know Ally? Have you ever
Yes,
looked
I
at that?
know and love Ally actually. Because to your point, so I think they are a great, they have a great savings account that's a high yield savings account. Let me tell you guys this story. I had a savings account with one of the brick and mortar banks. So like a Bank of America or a Wells Fargo. It was called SunTrust, and it's the predecessor to Truist. I don't know if Truist is nationwide, but the brick and mortar banks pay you such low interest. I got to $1,000 in my savings account, and I was so proud of that $1,000. Like, I finally have a comma in my savings account, right? They paid me a penny in interest, and they had the nerve to send me a bank statement to prove that I made this penny. So the brick and mortar banks, the interest rates are something like 0.001%, not exaggerating. That's literally the interest rate. Whereas with a high yield savings account like Ally or SoFi has one, I'm sure there's another one, but there are many of these banks where they are paying interest that's 3 to 4%, right? And that might not seem like a lot, but it's a whole lot more than 0.01%. So high yield
Yeah,
savings accounts are great. And Ally also has this bucket feature, like you're saying, where it's like it's one account, but then you can say this amount is for this thing, this amount is for that thing. And so I think being able to see exactly how much of your savings is for each goal is really great. I am going to, so this person is asking about copy pasting my email address. I actually don't have that functionality, but I've got a list of the things that I listed out. I'm about to send it to Amy, and she has that functionality to copy paste it out to everyone.
I do.
So there we go.
Okay, I will do that now.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What to do when someone is, or when your spouse is not in agreement with you about the budget. Okay, so this was me too. When we started this whole money journey before, so my thoughts about trying to get on board with my finances actually started before having my first child. And I had talked to my husband about like, oh, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. And I had heard like, people on podcasts talking about things that they had been able to do, and thinking that we could do that too. He was not interested at all because, as I mentioned, he went to medical school, I went to law school. And so he's like, we've been in school all this time, like it's time to live, right? He just wanted to to do the things. And so it wasn't until we had our child that I was actually able to articulate why it was important to me, because I could then see that link between having that control of our money and having that control of our time. Amy, I think you might be able to copy, like, if you can like highlight it and copy paste it so you don't have to
Right.
have to
No, and
tediously
I
do it.
did try that and it wasn't working. So that's
Okay,
why I was
gotcha.
like, ooh,
Yeah, the in my
yeah,
email address, there's an H after the T,
oh, okay.
RHOTHOMAS. Um, but so the thing that helped him to get on board was instead of approaching him like, well, I heard this, this person say this, right? Like, let's say Amy is a financial expert. Well, Amy says we should do this. Well, Amy said that's how I was approaching it. He didn't know Amy and he didn't care what Amy had to say. And so, no offense, Amy. But
That's okay. You don't
when,
want my advice.
when I started talking to him about these visions that I had for what could happen for our family, for us being able to have this freedom, more control over our finances, talking to him about what he had in mind for our family, the goals that he had, the vision that he saw, and us kind of dreaming together. Then from there, we were able to back into the personal finance side of it. So when I was initially like, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we should, I'm just telling him what we can do and what this person says we should do. He didn't care, but he got bought in when we were talking together about our dreams and our vision for our lives. And then money was a means for us to get there. So hopefully that would be helpful for you. I would try that with your spouse. Someone says, what is Ally? Ally is an online bank, and that's part of why they're able to pay that higher interest, because they don't have these brick and mortar locations to maintain. So they are online. You can open an account with them pretty easily, and then you can also still connect that account to other bank accounts. So if you still want to have a physical branch you can walk into, right, you can still connect your Bank of America to your Ally account and move money that way. But it's a great bank. I actually bank with them. And like Amy, I'm not being paid to say that, although I think I should look into whether they have a sponsorship, because I do talk about them a lot in my presentations.
That makes me feel better that you do with them. Somebody did mention Everbank, which I've never heard of, was at a 5% rate for a bit.
Oh yeah, I hadn't heard of that one either, but yes, they like all of these online banks have been doing a lot, because I first heard of high yield savings right before law school, and at that point, high yield was 1%, which is still more than the 0.00%. But they've increased quite a bit over the years. Let's see, someone says, I don't think I have ever had a budget. I just spend or don't spend, and I avoid debt like the plague. How do I get started on making a budget? Well, if that is working for you, I think that's okay, right? Like, you can have a plan for how you're going to spend, and it sounds like you do have a plan. You just maybe don't exactly write it down. If you want it to get started, I have a budget available at rhothomas.com/budget. And it's the spreadsheet that I was talking about, just cleaned up a little bit and made prettier. And some categories have been added over the years from my clients. But for some people, they don't like kind of categorizing things as much as I do. And so it could just be like, okay, I'm looking at my spending and this is how much is going to needs, right? So this is how much is my rent, my groceries, my car, my whatever. You can make those categories as combined or as separated out as you want to. But really, a budget is nothing more than how you plan your spending. So I know I'm bringing in X dollars. I'm going to spend this much for this category, this much for that category, etc. Making sure that as you plan that spending, you're not planning to spend more than you brought in. So hopefully that's helpful.
We do have
Yes.
another question. Do you suggest a percentage-based approach? What percentage do you recommend?
Okay, and that's actually a follow-up question to an earlier question.
Yeah.
Any practical tips for cutting expenses once all expenses are listed, a values-based approach. So taking that all together, I love this. I love it. You are thinking exactly the right way. So what I like to have my clients do is look at their spending for at least the last month, but you can get a really, really good picture if you'll take an average of the last 3 months, right? So you get all those categories listed out. You see how much you've spent on, groceries, on restaurants, on gas, etc. I also like for them to think about what are the things that are important to them. What are the top 3 things or the top 5 things that are most important to them? Sometimes it'll be things like family. For some clients, it's things like one was like my cleaning service. I refuse to give up my cleaning service. I'm like, you know what? That is fine, right? But you identify those things that are important to you, and then you see how that lines up with that look back that you did on your spending, because what you'll probably find is you're spending a lot on things that aren't on that list.
Mm.
And so you can look at some of those things that are beyond that list and see, like, okay, do I like that I'm spending $2,000 eating out a month? Maybe I want to cut that back, maybe not. Because I've had some clients where the answer for them was to cut back. I've had some clients where they hate cooking and they were perfectly fine with spending that money on eating out, and they were willing to balance that by cutting back in some other area that they don't care about. So, yes, I love the values based approach, looking at what's important to you and what's not. And then the percentage based approach, I don't recommend a percentage based approach as such, but I do have some kind of percentage based guidelines in terms of your spending. So, with respect to your housing, if you can keep it to around 25% of your take home pay, that's great. Sometimes people are a little above that, and that's okay. You just don't want to get to where a third of the money is going to your housing or half of the money, that kind of thing, because when you've got so much money tied up in one bill, then it's really hard to make progress on your goals and still make room for the other things that you need to pay for. So that's one that I look at, and then that percentage can change based on what else is going on. And then overall, if you keep your needs to about half of your spending, then you've still got a lot of room for your wants and your goals.
This has been so helpful. We're a little over time. I know people are busy, but Ro, this was amazing. Again, my takeaways is really that mindset. And again, it's then how you feel about it. Getting feedback, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. This really was wonderful, helpful, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. For folks to know, this is a recorded session. You'll receive the recording probably in a few minutes after we end the presentation. And thank you again to everyone for joining us.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, thank you again. Bye.